It is time to check in with Chris Dimakos. He is our CJD 800 legal contributor. And Chris, interesting story this week. I actually cut out the headline. I said, we need to discuss this with you. So here's a company, I guess you could say, or at least up until now, pretty woke-minded, like Google, for example. And that's the company we're talking about, who've decided, you know what, some employees, even as far as they're concerned, went a little too far. This happened to be posting over, Palestinian protests, et cetera, and these people were all let go, which kind of brings up the question now, have we sort of seen the end of this, this woke attitude where companies are waking up to it and saying, you know what, no, it's not acceptable here?
Right. What we used to see was the companies were fearful that if they did not take a certain accommodating position towards some of these progressive, activist issues, well, then they were afraid that they were going to be boycotted. They were afraid that they were going to receive a whole bunch of negative attention. But as we are starting to, maybe turn the corner, companies now are starting to say, hey, we are here for profit. We have to make profit, and we have to run a business here. And unfortunately, we want to accommodate, but whenever it means losing on the bottom line, if we're going to compromise our profit, that's where we have to draw the line. And we're starting to see companies take a position where we're fine, we accommodate, we do what we can, but at the end of the day, the work has to get done, and we can't jeopardize our company, we can't jeopardize our award. If that means taking certain contracts with government, if that means, not allowing employees to protest inside of our building, not allowing them to take time off to attend protests, these are all things that companies are starting to do and are starting to be not covert about it. They're being explicitly open about the fact that they're saying, we respect everyone's political beliefs, and we respect that. But when it's time to work, it's time to work, and we can't compromise our profit. And that we're seeing more and more now.
So the headline that I came across, because it's right here, it says, even Google, a leader once among the woke, is waking up. Now, this is not obviously just Google alone. In their case, it made headlines. But other companies, to your point, Chris, are now beginning to tell those employees, yes, this no longer works.
Right. And we've seen many cases, like, there was the Netflix ran into some problems because there were some issues. I think it was with Dave Chappelle, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yep.
there was calls to have it removed, and they said, no. It's going to stay on because there's a lot of views, and that's the content that's doing very well. So we're going to leave it on there. We saw that with Spotify, I think, and even Disney. Disney was a company that seems to have taken more of a step back in terms of how active it is on these issues, and trying to maybe alter the way that they're putting out their content. But so companies are making changes. There's no question about it. And some employees are starting to realize that, there's something called time theft. It's not often talked about, but time theft is a major issue with companies, especially since this remote work. And when employees are taking time out of their day to participate in these protests, and they're on social media when they're supposed to be working from home, but companies were fearful of sanctioning those employees before. Not so much anymore. They get suspended, they get terminated, and the reason is, hey, you took time off of work to participate in this protest. It's not the fact that you went to the protest, it's the fact that you did so on company time, and we can't allow for that. So more and more we're starting to see companies saying we are a for-profit business, and that is the ultimate goal here, and you get paid to do the work, and if you diverge from that, you're going to receive sanctions, no question about it.
So let's shift this around and talk about it from the employee's perspective then. You're the employee. At what point have you crossed the line?
Right. So one important thing that distinguishes the difference between the employer and the employee is this element of subordination, right? If you're a freelance writer, you have the choice to write what you want. You don't have to go to the office at a certain time. You have a lot of independence. Well, in the employee-employer relationship, that dynamic, there's this element of subordination where they tell you what you have to do, and you have to do that in order to get paid. So in exchange for your services, the employer pays you a salary to do the work. And whenever that doesn't get respected, whenever that dynamic is not respected, where the employee is getting paid and not providing services, well, that's when we have an issue. And that's when the employer starts to have grounds to say, whether it's because they affected their brand, whether it's because Some of the posts were so extreme from a point of view that it jeopardizes the goodwill of the company and their image in the public. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why an employer can sanction an employee. But at the end of the day, if you're an employee, you have to remember you work for an employer. You're there to provide services for that employer, and you get paid in return for that. And if that gets jeopardized in any way, well, then the company has a right to say, "Hey, that's not what you get paid for. We have to preserve this dynamic where you are subordinate of the company." And when that changes, that's when you start seeing employers either terminate or sanction their employees.
Yeah. So then you get to the point, Chris, where let's say, for example, you're out there, you're not at work necessarily. Maybe you're out there after work on a weekend, whatever. You get involved in a protest like this. You happen to be seen and maybe you say something that doesn't necessarily reflect company policy, yet your employer finds out about it because it's now public. And at that point, do they have a right to simply come to you? And we've talked about this before in a different capacity, right? The idea that, you know what, you're representing a company here, and what you do shines a light on them as well. So how far does that go?
And more so now than ever. I've had discussions with people who, for example, who are doctors, who are professionals at government entities, and they've talked to me and said, what do I do about this? I have a coworker, for example, who's being extremely vocal about issues that are sensitive to me, and my employer is not doing anything about it. Should I do something? So it's a very volatile time, especially with social media, and people are feeling like they have now a platform to voice how they feel, where that might not have been the case 30 or 40 years ago. So there's no question it's a lot more volatile. But as an employer, what an employee does on their personal time is their personal time. The only time that it comes into question is when you can make the link between the employee and whatever they're doing and the company. So if somebody has a private Facebook profile or Instagram profile without any connection to the company, well, the employer is going to have a very hard time sanctioning an employee for something that they're doing on their personal time, and there's no way to connect the dots. But if that's not the case, if their name is clear, if their profile indicates that they work for a certain company, well, now that company is getting tied into whatever views you have, and it can be brought back to that company. So the rule is, if there's any connection, if there's any way you can connect the dots between what you're doing on your own personal time and the company that you work for, well, that's when the companies start having a say about their protecting their brand and their goodwill, and when they can sanction you. If there is no way to connect the two, then they have a very hard time trying to regulate what you do on your personal time.
So last question is a hypothetical. Let's say, taking this example, a client of that company happens to see you at one of these things, recognizes you because they deal with you perhaps through the company, and then goes to your employer and says, "Hey, I saw this guy who I deal with going ahead and being at this protest, and I'm not okay with that." Then what?
Right. So that's when you're in the question of a very heavily factual based question to determine what were they doing, what we're doing peaceful protests, what they're doing was vandalizing. So you cannot sanction an employee because they have a political belief or because they associate themselves with a political belief. But if whatever they're doing there is something that is not deemed within the law and legal, and just a regular march to support a certain cause, if it goes beyond that, that's when the company can step in. But unfortunately for a company, the employees, if they're on their off time and they're doing something that's within the law, that's okay. It's only when you start taking, views that are considered to be, I would say, more extreme,
right,
much more volatile, that's when you can start running into some trouble with your employer.
Chris Dimakos. Chris, thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron.